The distress signal came from the far edge of human-occupied space, an old, nearly forgotten colony on the planet Valtrian 4. The message was short, fragmented, and laced with pure terror. "This is Valtrian 4. Emergency. Hostiles inbound. Unknown species. Oh God, they're not here to negotiate. We need—" The transmission ended in static. On the command deck of the HSS Valiant, the flagship of humanity's first fleet, the Admiral stood motionless, watching the distress call repeat on the holo display. It was old, nearly a day late, meaning whatever had happened was already well underway. But there was no question. Valtrian 4 was under attack. "Get me a full scan of the system," he ordered, voice sharp as steel. "I want fleet readiness in 20 minutes. We're moving out." The bridge crew snapped into action. Officers at their stations relayed orders across the fleet, their hands dancing across consoles as data scrolled across their displays. Across a dozen warships, alarms blared, pilots scrambled to their fighters, and weapons systems powered up. Humanity's response was coming, and it was coming fast. Valtrian 4 wasn't the most strategic colony. It was far from the core worlds, out in the cold reaches of space, where settlers scraped out a living on rocky soil and deep space miners harvested rare metals. But it was still human territory, and the Admiral would be damned before he let some unknown force wipe out a colony without consequences. "Admiral," a voice called from the sensor station. "Long-range scans are picking up energy signatures near Valtrian 4. They're faint, but they don't match anything in our database." "How many?" "Hard to say. At least 5 large vessels, but there could be more. No recognizable transponders, no IFF signals. They're not one of ours. Unknown hostiles, no diplomatic channels, no warning." The Admiral's jaw tightened. Humanity had expanded into the stars with the understanding that they were not alone. Over the decades, they had encountered alien species, some peaceful, others wary. But this, an attack without reason or communication, this was something else. "Helm, plot a course for Valtrian 4. Full burn. Tactical, bring all weapon systems online and run simulations for orbital combat. If these things want a fight, we'll give them one." The fleet surged forward, engines burning bright against the void. Valtrian 4 was burning. The colony, once a sprawling collection of domed cities and mining outposts, was now a war zone. Fires raged across the landscape, and thick plumes of black smoke rose into the atmosphere. The alien ships, hulking masses of jagged metal and organic plating, hovered in low orbit, sending down pulses of energy that turned buildings into molten slag. The surviving colonists had taken refuge in the underground mining tunnels, their last desperate messages filled with cries for help and terrified whispers about the creatures that had landed. The aliens were unlike anything seen before, towering insectoid beings with chitinous armor and multiple limbs ending in razor-sharp claws. Their eyes burned with an eerie blue light, and they moved with horrifying precision, cutting down anything in their path. They weren't here to conquer. They were here to exterminate, and they were fast. Survivors who had tried to run into the forests were cut down before they could make it far. Others barricaded themselves in buildings, only to be ripped apart when the creatures tore through walls like paper. Every attempt at resistance ended the same way, in blood and silence. But then, humanity's fleet arrived. The HSS Valiant and its escort ships dropped out of FTL with a thunderous pulse of energy, their hulls gleaming under the light of Valtrian 4's sun. Within moments, the battleships locked onto their targets. "Multiple hostile ships detected in orbit," called out the tactical officer. "Weapons charged, enemy defenses active." The Admiral's gaze hardened as he watched the alien vessels maneuver into attack formation. No attempt at communication, no demands, just war. "Fine. Fire." The sky over Valtrian 4 erupted in light as the first salvo of railgun rounds and plasma torpedoes streaked toward the enemy. The battle had begun. The first volley struck like the wrath of an angry god. High-velocity railgun slugs, each the size of a dropship, tore through the void, slamming into the alien ships with devastating force. Some rounds hit energy barriers, sending ripples of light cascading across their surfaces, but others punched through, shattering hull plating and exposing the dark, writhing interiors beneath. But the enemy wasn't passive. The alien vessels moved like living things, their jagged, organic hulls shifting unnaturally as they twisted away from incoming fire. One of the larger ships, a monstrous construct resembling a colossal insect carapace, returned fire. Beams of violet energy lanced through the black, moving faster than any known plasma weapon. Incoming fire! The bridge of the HSS Valiant rumbled as the energy blasts slammed into its shielding. Sparks flew from overloaded conduits, and the lights flickered for a brief moment. "Shields holding at 76%, an officer reported, his voice tight with urgency. "Redistributing power to compensate." The rest of the fleet wasn't as fortunate. The HSS Dauntless, a heavy cruiser, took a direct hit to its midsection, and a fiery explosion bloomed outward as a portion of its hull vaporized. Damage reports flooded in, sections breached, atmosphere venting, casualties mounting. "Get them out of the line of fire," the admiral ordered, "and hit them harder." Fighter squadrons launched from the fleet's hangars, swarming forward like an angry nest of hornets. Pilots locked onto their targets and unleashed hell, missiles streaking ahead, mass driver cannons chattering with rapid-fire destruction. The enemy ships adapted. Their hulls shifted, almost regenerating, sealing damage like a living organism healing a wound. And then, something worse happened. A massive rift opened in the space between the ships. It wasn't an explosion or a wormhole. It was something unnatural, a black void edged with writhing purple tendrils of energy, and from it more of them emerged. Twice as many. Maybe more. "Admiral," the tactical officer's voice faltered. "They're multiplying." On the surface, the battle raged with equal ferocity. The colonists who had survived the initial attack were fighting with everything they had. Makeshift barricades, stolen alien weapons, even mining tools repurposed into crude melee weapons. But it wasn't enough. The insectoid creatures swarmed like a hive, their chittering voices echoing through the ruins. They moved too fast, too coordinated, like a singular mind guiding thousands of limbs. Soldiers of the Colony Defense Force fought valiantly, but for every alien they brought down, 5 more took its place. Then, the sky turned to fire. Orbital bombardment. The fleet wasn't just fighting in space. They were clearing the ground for reinforcements. Mass driver cannons rained destruction down onto enemy clusters, turning entire swaths of land into molten craters. And then came the drop pods. The Hell Jumpers. Humanity's elite shock troops, the first boots on the ground in any war zone. Encased in heavy armor, armed to the teeth and trained for one thing only: total annihilation of the enemy. The first wave slammed into the battlefield, the pods embedding themselves deep into the ground. Hatches burst open, and the soldiers charged forward, weapons blazing. "Lock it down!" their commander roared through the comms. "Push them back! Show these things what happens when they fuck with humanity!" The creatures surged forward to meet them. The battle for Valtrian 4 had just begun. The battlefield erupted into chaos. The Helljumpers advanced in tight formations, their heavy boots slamming against the scorched ground. Each soldier was a walking fortress, clad in reinforced exosuits that enhanced their speed, strength, and resilience. Their rifles spat high-velocity rounds, shredding the insectoid creatures in bursts of crimson and blue. But for every alien they cut down, more came from the shadows, climbing over the bodies of their fallen kin like an unstoppable tide. The creatures fought with a terrifying level of coordination. They didn't hesitate. They didn't retreat. When one fell, another immediately took its place, swiping with razor-sharp claws or spewing acidic bile that melted through armor like paper. One Helljumper screamed as a creature tackled him, its talons slicing through his chest plate. His squadmate gunned the beast down and tried to pull him free, but the acid had already eaten through to the bone. The soldier barely had time to gasp before another alien pounced on him, ripping his helmet clean off. The Helljumpers didn't waver. They fought harder. "Hold the line," their commander barked. "Push forward. We need to secure the tunnels." The mining tunnels, the last refuge of the surviving colonists. If the aliens breached them, it was over. Above, the sky boiled with fire as the fleet waged its own war. The HSS Valiant shuddered under another impact, its shields flaring as alien weapons battered its hull. The enemy fleet had tripled in size, spilling forth from those nightmarish voids in space. They weren't just multiplying, they were summoning reinforcements from some unknown hell. "Status on the fleet?" the Admiral demanded. "HSS Dauntless is falling back for emergency repairs," the tactical officer reported. "We've lost the HSS Resolute. They hit its reactor core. No survivors." The Admiral clenched his jaw. And the enemy? Still coming. The situation was deteriorating fast. Humanity had superior firepower, but these creatures didn't seem to care about losses. They kept regenerating, kept multiplying, and they had no fear. Then, something changed. A massive pulse rippled through space, dark, suffocating, unnatural. The battlefield went silent for a fraction of a second before every alien ship turned in unison. It was as if something had issued a silent command. Then, without warning, the enemy forces descended towards the planet. "Admiral," an officer shouted. "They're ignoring us. They're going for the surface." The Admiral felt a cold chill settle in his chest. This wasn't just an invasion. It wasn't just an extermination. The colony was their objective. "All ships, full bombardment on those descending vessels," he ordered. "We cannot let them reinforce the ground forces." The fleet responded instantly, unleashing a barrage of firepower that turned the void into a storm of destruction. Some enemy ships were obliterated mid-descent, their wreckage burning through the atmosphere. But too many made it through. On the ground, the sky darkened as dozens of enemy drop pods screamed toward the surface like meteorites. The real fight was about to begin. The first enemy drop pods struck the surface like thunderbolts, embedding deep into the scorched ground of Valtrian 4. The Helljumpers barely had time to react before the pods cracked open, spilling forth a new wave of horrors. These weren't like the insectoid foot soldiers that had been ravaging the colony. These creatures were bigger. Twice the size of a man, their carapaces gleamed under the fire-lit sky. Their multiple limbs ended in serrated blades, and their faces, if they could be called that, were a writhing mess of tendrils that pulsed and twitched as if tasting the air. Then they charged. "New hostiles! Bigger, meaner, faster!" one Helljumper shouted through the comms as he opened fire. His armor-piercing rounds tore into the first creature's exoskeleton, slowing it down, but not stopping it. The beast took the hits, screeched, and kept coming. The Helljumper barely had time to react before the creature's blade-like arm swung forward, cutting him clean in half. "Fall back!" their commander roared. "Get to the tunnels now!" The soldiers moved fast, laying down suppressing fire as they retreated toward the underground mining network, the last refuge of the surviving colonists. But the creatures were relentless. One of them leapt onto a fleeing soldier, impaling him straight through the chest. Another ripped through an entire barricade like it was made of paper. The Helljumpers fought like demons, But for every monster they brought down, 2 more took its place. Then, the tunnels came into view. A massive, reinforced entrance carved into the mountainside, originally designed for hauling cargo and equipment down into the deep mining shafts. Now, it was humanity's last hope. "Get inside. Seal the doors." The surviving helljumpers rushed in, dragging wounded soldiers with them. As soon as the last man crossed the threshold, they activated the blast doors, thick slabs of reinforced steel designed to withstand cave-ins and explosions. The doors slammed shut just as the creatures reached them, their monstrous claws clanging against the metal. For a brief moment, there was silence. Then, the pounding began. The beasts were trying to break through. Up in orbit, the Admiral watched the horror unfold on his tactical display. The enemy had changed tactics. They had shifted from a chaotic swarm to a coordinated invasion force. These things weren't mindless. They were adapting, learning. A deep frown creased his face. "Options?" "Sir, ground forces have fallen back to the tunnels. Civilians are inside, but they're trapped. Those things are trying to break through the doors." "And the enemy fleet?" "They've stopped engaging us directly. They're holding position above the planet." The Admiral's stomach twisted. The enemy wasn't fighting to win. They were stalling. For what? A new signal blared across the command deck. "Sir," the comms officer's face had gone pale. "We're detecting a massive energy spike right above the colony." The Admiral turned to the main display, just in time to see the rift open. A swirling vortex of pure darkness ripped open the sky, stretching wide like an unholy maw. Something was coming through. Something big. The battle for Valtrian 4 was about to reach its true nightmare. The rift above Valtrian 4 widened, stretching like a bleeding wound in space. It pulsed with sickening energy, a gaping void of pure darkness, tendrils of violet lightning crackling around its edges. And from its depths, something emerged. A behemoth. The creature was unlike anything recorded in human history. It wasn't a ship, but a living entity, a leviathan of nightmares, easily the size of a dreadnought. Its body was a grotesque fusion of armor and organic flesh, black as midnight and glistening with unnatural fluids. Rows of jagged, pulsating limbs lined its sides, each tipped with serrated claws long enough to tear through a battleship's hull. But its eyes were the worst. Glowing violet orbs, dozens of them, shifted and focused in different directions, radiating a terrible, alien intelligence. And then it screamed, a mind-rending psychic howl that ripped through every human consciousness in range. On the HSS Valiant, the bridge crew clutched their heads, some collapsing to the floor, blood trickling from their noses. Even the Admiral staggered, his vision blurring as the creature's presence invaded his thoughts. A monstrous, overwhelming feeling of hunger. This thing wasn't just an invader. It was a predator, and they were its prey. "Shields failing!" an officer shouted, barely able to focus. "That thing it's interfering with our systems." The Admiral gritted his teeth, forcing his mind to fight back against the crushing psychic weight. He had been in the Navy for 30 years. He had survived wars, seen the worst of humanity fought through nightmares, and he refused to bow to this thing. "Target that abomination!" he roared, slamming his fist on the console. "I want every railgun, every torpedo, and every fighter firing on that thing." The fleet reacted instantly. Missiles streaked toward the Leviathan, railgun rounds ripped through the void, and plasma beams lanced forward, humanity's full wrath unleashed in a single moment. The beast reacted. It opened its maw, a massive, writhing cavity lined with rotating teeth, and vomited a pulse of dark energy that tore through the first wave of projectiles, detonating them mid-flight. The few rounds that made it through, they barely scratched its armored hide. "Damage report?" the Admiral snapped. "Minimal, sir." The creature had shrugged off the first attack, and then, in an instant, it retaliated. Its limbs stretched forward, and suddenly, black tendrils erupted from the void, latching onto one of the nearest battleships, the HSS Triumph. Before anyone could react, the creature pulled. The Triumph, a vessel 5 kilometers long, screamed in protest as its hull was crushed like a tin can. The ship buckled, metal snapping like brittle bones, entire decks imploding under the impossible pressure. Within seconds, the once mighty warship was ripped in half. More than 10,000 souls were aboard. And then the beast consumed them. The Admiral could do nothing but watch as the shattered remains of the Triumph were absorbed into the creature's body. The wreckage melted into its blackened flesh, its wounds healing instantly as if it had never been touched. This thing wasn't just a predator. It was feeding. And with every ship it consumed, it was only getting stronger. On the ground, the pounding on the tunnel doors had stopped. The surviving helljumpers and colonists stood in breathless silence, weapons ready. The tunnels were dimly lit by flickering emergency lights, casting long shadows on the walls. Then, a low thrum vibrated through the ground, a sound that didn't belong. A survivor, a young technician, pressed her ear against the tunnel wall. Her face went deathly pale. "They're not trying to break through anymore," she whispered. The commander turned to her, his voice hoarse. "What do you mean?" She swallowed hard. "They're waiting. For what?" And then, as if answering the question, the entire tunnel shook. Not from explosives, not from enemy claws, but from something massive, shifting beneath the surface. And for the first time since the battle began, the helljumpers felt fear. The tunnels trembled again. Dust rained from the ceiling, and the dim emergency lights flickered as something shifted deep underground. The helljumpers tightened their grips on their weapons, scanning the darkness beyond the last barricade. The pounding on the steel doors had stopped, but the silence was worse. "Infrared scans are going wild," one soldier muttered, his visor flashing erratic heat signatures across the tunnel walls. "Something's moving beneath us." A sharp metallic groan filled the air, followed by a sudden violent crack as the ground split open. A black mass of writhing tendrils and chitinous limbs erupted from below, smashing through the tunnel floor like a breaching sea monster. The impact sent bodies flying, helljumpers and civilians alike, as the tunnel collapsed inward. Screams filled the air as the thing pulled itself up from the depths. It was different from the creatures outside. Bigger. Smarter. Its twisted exoskeleton pulsed with an unnatural energy, its elongated head lined with jagged spines. Unlike the insectoids, this one had hands, long, clawed fingers that twitched and flexed as if testing their movement. Then it spoke, not with words, not with sound, but directly into their minds. "You will not escape." The helljumpers felt the voice inside them, an oily whisper sliding through their thoughts like a parasite. Some staggered, gripping their helmets as if trying to block it out. One soldier dropped his rifle, his breath ragged. "You will be given to the Great One, and you will become part of us." The commander fired first. His rifle roared, armor-piercing rounds ripping into the creature's chest. It recoiled, black ichor spraying from its wounds. Then it grinned, jagged teeth, too many for its mouth, spreading wide in an unnatural, mocking expression. The bullets weren't enough. "Light it up!" the commander bellowed. The tunnel exploded with firepower. Every helljumper unleashed hell, their weapons pouring out round after round. Grenades flew, filling the air with shrapnel and concussive blasts. The creature shrieked as its armor cracked, limbs flailing wildly. For a moment they thought it was enough. Then it moved, faster than anything that size had the right to move. One soldier barely had time to scream before a clawed hand speared through his torso, lifting him off the ground. The creature twisted, using his body as a shield before hurling him into two others. Another trooper fired a flamethrower, bathing the monster in liquid fire. It roared, flailing, but instead of dying, the flames sank into its flesh, the embers absorbing into its body like a living battery. It was learning, adapting, evolving. "Fall back!" the commander roared. The Helljumpers grabbed the civilians, retreating deeper into the tunnels, navigating the winding pathways of the mining network. Explosions echoed behind them as they set charges to collapse passages, hoping, praying that the monster wouldn't follow. But they all knew the truth. It wasn't just following. It was hurting them. Above the battlefield, the situation had gone from desperate to catastrophic. The creature in orbit, the Leviathan, had fully emerged from the rift. It hung over the planet like an executioner's blade, its massive form blocking out the stars. It had stopped attacking. Not because it was losing, because it was waiting. "Admiral, we're detecting massive energy fluctuations," a technician called out. "It's doing something, but we don't know what." The Admiral watched the monstrosity with narrowed eyes. It had taken out the HSS Triumph like it was feeding. But now it was holding back. Why? Then his blood ran cold. The rift, it wasn't closing, it was expanding. The edges twisted and pulsed, growing wider, the swirling darkness pulling at reality itself. The Admiral's worst fears confirmed themselves in an instant. The enemy fleet hadn't come to fight. They had come to summon something bigger. "All ships, immediate rearm and full firepower on that rift," he barked. "We cannot let it open any further." The fleet responded at once. Every battleship, every cruiser, every fighter unleashed their full arsenal. Railguns roared, plasma cannons screamed, and nuclear payloads streaked toward the abyss. The rift shuddered under the impact. But it didn't close. It was too late. Something else was coming through. Something beyond anything humanity had ever faced. And the Admiral knew, with a sinking dread, that this battle was no longer about victory. It was about survival. The rift expanded with a sickening pull, distorting the fabric of reality itself. The Admiral watched in horror as something far larger than the Leviathan began to emerge from its depths. The creature, no, the entity, was incomprehensible in scale. It dwarfed the Leviathan. It dwarfed the fleet. A titanic horror, so vast that its form warped space around it. Its body was a churning mass of writhing flesh, shifting and twisting as if it were not bound by the laws of physics. Enormous tendril-like appendages stretched outward, crackling with violet energy, while rows of glowing, eldritch eyes blinked open across its shifting hide. The Admiral could feel it, inside his mind. This was not just a monster. It was not merely a war machine or a predator like the Leviathan. This was something older, something that had existed before stars had formed. A god. And it was waking up. On the surface, the Helljumpers were running out of options. The tunnels stretched endlessly, twisting in ways the maps didn't recognize. Somewhere ahead was the deep mining sector. If they could reach it, they might find some real defenses, maybe even escape tunnels. But the creature was still following. It never ran, never rushed. It just walked, unbothered, confident, and the Helljumpers knew why. It had them exactly where it wanted them. "Keep moving," the commander shouted. "I don't care if your legs are burning, we don't stop!" Then, ahead, something rippled. The tunnel walls shifted, not rock, not metal, but flesh. The corridor itself was changing. One of the colonists, a terrified woman, screamed as the walls split open, revealing a massive, lidless eye staring back at them. The tunnels were becoming part of the entity. The creature wasn't just chasing them. It was turning the planet into itself. A Helljumper raised his rifle and fired. The bullet struck the eye, and it blinked, unbothered, before the flesh closed over again. Then, the walls moved. A chitinous limb erupted from the side of the tunnel, spearing through one of the soldiers like a spike through paper. He gasped, eyes wide, blood bubbling from his lips, before the tendril dragged him into the wall itself, fusing him with the shifting flesh. And then he started screaming, not a human scream, not a death cry, but a warped alien wail, a sound that should not exist. The walls absorbed him, his body twisting into something new, something wrong. His armor melted, his face elongating, his limbs snapping and reforming. He was no longer human. He had become part of the entity, and the others realized, with a cold, soul-crushing certainty, that this was what the entity wanted. It was consuming them, changing them, and soon it would consume the entire planet. In orbit, the battle was turning into a massacre. The entity's titanic form fully emerged from the rift, its vast tendrils wrapping around the Leviathan, not as an equal, but as a master handling its servant. The Leviathan shuddered, its body writhing as the larger entity absorbed it, breaking it down like a parasite absorbing a host. And then, for the first time, the entity focused on the fleet. The screaming began, not from comms, not from distress calls, but inside their minds. Crew members collapsed where they stood, clawing at their skulls, blood pouring from their noses and ears. Some tore at their own eyes, gibbering nonsense before their bodies seized up and stopped moving altogether. Some didn't die. Some changed. Their flesh twisted, their bones snapping and reforming as jagged tendrils sprouted from their backs. They turned on their own crews, ripping them apart with unnatural strength, their faces stretched into ghoulish alien grins. Humanity wasn't just losing, they were becoming the enemy. The Admiral gritted his teeth, fighting against the entity's mental assault. He felt its voice slithering through his thoughts, trying to invade his will. Submit. He grabbed a combat knife from his belt and sliced his own arm open, letting the pain anchor him back to reality. Fire everything, he bellowed. The fleet unleashed hell. Torpedoes, railguns, plasma cannons, nuclear warheads. The void burned. The sky ripped apart with explosions that would have turned entire planets to dust. The Admiral watched the devastation unfold, humanity's final desperate defiance. But when the fire cleared, the entity was still there, unscathed, unbothered. And then, slowly, it turned its gaze to the Admiral's ship. The HSS Valiant, the flagship of the fleet, the strongest warship in human history. And the entity reached for it, a massive, writhing tendril, kilometers long, stretched toward them like a god plucking an insect from the dirt. "Admiral!" a desperate voice screamed. "It's coming straight for us!" The Admiral stared at death itself. His crew waited for his command, and he knew, with a bitter certainty, that they had one last move left. One chance, one shot at damming this thing back to hell, if they were willing to pay the price. He exhaled and made his choice. The tendril stretched toward the HSS Valiant, a towering mass of writhing flesh and cosmic horror. The Admiral watched, his heart pounding, as it darkened the stars themselves, blotting out everything but its own sickening presence. There was no escape, no reinforcements, no miracle. But there was one last play. He turned to his crew, the men and women who had fought at his side, who had given everything for humanity's survival. They were waiting for his command, fear in their eyes, but also resolve. He inhaled sharply and gave the order that would damn them all. Overload the core. The bridge went silent. A single officer hesitated before speaking, voice shaking. Sir, that would... I know. Every person on board understood. A ship of the Valiant's class carried enough reactor energy to level a continent. If they detonated the core inside the entity, it might be enough to tear it apart. But it would cost them everything. And still, not a single officer refused the order. Because if they didn't do this, there wouldn't be a humanity left to save. Final authorization confirmed, the weapons officer said, his voice steady. Core primed for detonation. A deep hum resonated through the Valiant, its systems preparing for the ultimate sacrifice. The Admiral took one last breath, eyes locked on the horror before him. Then, do it. The command was given. The ship lurched forward, engines roaring at full burn, pushing toward the entity's massive tendril. Every cannon still operational fired blindly, trying to carve a path through the monstrous flesh, trying to force their way into the beast itself. The entity reacted, but too late. The Valiant reached its target, slamming into the writhing mass, and the core detonated. The universe exploded. A shockwave unlike anything before tore through the battlefield. It wasn't just an explosion. It was a star-going supernova, a blinding, raging burst of energy that engulfed the entity, the rift, and everything caught in its path. The void itself screamed. The rift shuddered, twisted, collapsed. The entity writhed in agony, its colossal form cracking, its countless eyes bursting into molten streams of light. Its limbs convulsed, its psychic presence howled in defiance. And then, finally, it died. The beast collapsed inward, its form imploding, dragged back into whatever abyss it had crawled from. The remaining alien ships, now leaderless, faltered, their movements turning erratic before many simply ceased functioning, their twisted biology unable to sustain itself without the mastermind controlling them. The battle was over, but the HSS Valiant and the thousands of souls aboard were gone. The cost had been paid in full. On the surface, the Helljumpers emerged from the tunnels. The sky, once a battlefield of fire and death, was now eerily clear. The enemy was gone. The great abomination that had infected the very ground had withered, its influence fading into the wind. The soldiers stared upward, their bodies battered, their minds shattered, as they watched the remnants of the battle drift through the heavens. And then, slowly, they saluted, not just to the fleet, but to the ones who had made sure there was still a humanity left to fight for. Days later, in the depths of space, a single broken escape pod drifted among the wreckage of the Valiant. Inside, the Admiral gasped awake, his body weak, his mind barely clinging to consciousness. Somehow, he had survived. But as his vision blurred, as he reached for the emergency beacon, he saw something. A fragment of the entity, small, weak, but still alive. And deep in his soul, he knew. This war wasn't over. Not yet. The distress signal came through like a whisper in the dark, a desperate plea from a dying world. Admiral Kira Volkov stood on the bridge of the Vindicator, humanity's most advanced warship, her gaze locked onto the holographic display. The message was garbled, fragmented, but the meaning was clear. This is the Yelani Republic. Under attack, genocide. Please, anyone, help us. The bridge crew was silent. The Yelani were an advanced species, members of the Galactic Council, yet they had never sought alliances with humans. To them, Earth was a backwater death world, filled with violent primitives who had clawed their way into space far too quickly. The Council feared humanity, distrusted them. And yet, when war came knocking, it wasn't the Council they called. It was us. Kira turned to her tactical officer, Commander Idris. "Who's attacking them?" Idris's fingers flew across his console, pulling up sensor data. "Looks like the Zephyr Dominion, Admiral. Heavy fleet presence. Multiple dreadnoughts. They've already wiped out most Yolani defenses." A low murmur spread through the bridge. The Zephyr Dominion, a species known for conquest, enslaving or exterminating every race they encountered. They followed no treaties, no rules of war. Wherever they arrived, civilizations burned. Kira exhaled slowly, her mind working through the options. The Yolani wouldn't have called humanity unless they were out of hope. Earth had been denied a seat in the Council, refused entry into trade agreements, and branded as too aggressive. But now? Now the so-called primitives were their only hope. She turned to her comms officer. "Send a message to the fleet. We move now." A chorus of confirmations echoed across the bridge. The Vindicator wasn't alone. Behind it, the first expeditionary fleet stood ready. 30 of Earth's deadliest warships, built for one purpose: survival in an unforgiving galaxy. The Yolani had called for help. Humanity was coming. The fleet exited warp just outside Yolani space, the void lighting up as warships emerged from faster-than-light travel. The battle was already underway. The Yolani homeworld, Seraphis, burned beneath a relentless orbital bombardment. Above it, the remains of their fleet drifted, shattered hulls and debris scattering like dust. And at the center of it all, the Zephyr war fleet. "By God," whispered Lieutenant Hale, "they're butchering them." Kira's grip tightened on the armrest of her chair. The Dominion fleet was massive, outnumbering humanity's forces at least 2-1. Their ships were sleek, obsidian black, bristling with plasma cannons and energy lances. They were built to dominate, to crush opposition. "Status on the Yolani survivors?" she asked. "Minimal resistance left," Idris reported grimly. "Their planetary shields are failing. If we don't act now—" "We act," Kira cut in. She stood, voice hard as steel. "Open a channel to the Dominion flagship." A few seconds later, the view screen flickered, revealing a monstrous figure. A Zephyr warlord, towering and insectoid, his armored carapace gleaming under the ship's internal lights. His mandibles clicked, his 4 eyes narrowed. "You are the humans," he sneered. "Deathworlders." Kira didn't flinch. "Admiral Kira Volkov of the United Terran Navy, you are committing genocide against a sovereign species. Cease your attack and withdraw." The warlord chittered in amusement. "Withdraw." "You misunderstand, human. This world is already dead. The Yolani are weak. They have no right to exist, and you—" He leaned forward. "Your kind should have stayed on your cursed world. You think you can challenge the Dominion?" Kira's lips curled into a smirk. "I don't think I know." She cut the feed. "All ships," she commanded. "Weapons free. Show them why the galaxy fears Deathworlders." And with that, the human fleet charged. The void of space erupted into chaos as humanity's warships surged forward, weapons blazing. Energy lances and railgun slugs tore through the blackness, slamming into the Zephyr fleet with devastating force. The Dominion ships were built for conquest, but they had never fought humans before. They had never faced the sheer brutality of Deathworlder warfare. The Vindicator led the charge, its main cannons roaring to life. Plasma bursts struck the nearest Zephyr dreadnought, melting through its hull like a hot knife through wax. Explosions rippled along its spine before it split apart, debris scattering in all directions. "Enemy ship down," Hale shouted. "Keep pushing," Kira barked. "Target their command vessels, cut off their leadership." The Zephyr weren't prepared for this. Their usual strategy was overwhelming firepower and terror tactics. But humanity? Humanity thrived in war. They had fought each other for thousands of years before ever reaching the stars. They knew how to adapt, how to win. The Dominion fleet scrambled to reorganize, their warlord realizing too late that this was no easy prey. More human ships arrived, tearing through the Zephyr lines like a pack of wolves. They struck with precision, overwhelming enemy vessels one by one. Inside the Vindicator, Kira's crew worked with deadly efficiency. Idris called out enemy movements, Hale coordinated targeting solutions, and the bridge hummed with controlled chaos. Incoming torpedoes. Deploy countermeasures. Hostile flagship attempting to flank. Not on my watch, Kira muttered. Bring the Vindicator about and charge their flagship head-on. Her crew hesitated for only a second before obeying. The massive battleship shifted course, engines flaring as it barreled straight toward the enemy command ship. The Zephyr warlord, watching from his bridge, finally realized his mistake. He had underestimated humanity. The Vindicator unleashed a full salvo. Railgun slugs the size of cars slammed into the Zephyr flagship, ripping through its shields. Its hull buckled under the assault, sections venting atmosphere as fires spread across its decks. The warlord bellowed in rage, his mandibles clicking furiously, but his fleet was crumbling around him. And then, the Yolani made their move. What few warships remained of their once proud navy had been hiding, waiting, watching. Seeing humanity fight, seeing the Death Worlders take the fight to the enemy, had reignited something in them. A final stand. The remaining Yolani vessels surged forward, joining the human fleet. They weren't built for war like the Terrans, but desperation made them dangerous. They rammed into Zephyr cruisers, overloaded their reactors to cause massive explosions, and fought with the fury of a species on the edge of extinction. For the first time in its history, the Dominion fleet broke. The warlord's voice screeched across open comms. "Retreat! Fall back! The humans are—" His transmission cut off as the Vindicator fired its main cannon directly into his bridge. The Zephyr flagship detonated in a blinding fireball, pieces of its hull scattering into the void. Silence followed. The once invincible Dominion fleet was in full retreat. The battlefield, once filled with slaughter, was now eerily quiet. Kira exhaled, gripping the armrest of her chair. "Status report?" Idris scanned his console. "Zephyr forces retreating. Casualties heavy, but we held the line, Admiral." A message flickered onto the comms display. A transmission from the Yolani leadership. Their Prime Minister, battered and bloodied but alive, appeared on the screen. His eyes, once filled with disdain for humans, were now brimming with something else. Respect. "You came when no one else would," he said, voice shaking. "You saved our people." Kira leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "Remember that." She cut the transmission. Humanity had answered the call for help, and the galaxy would never forget. The battlefield was quiet now, but the weight of what had just happened still pressed down on the bridge of the Vindicator. The Zephyr fleet, the unstoppable conquerors of the galaxy, had been driven into retreat by humans, by Death Worlders. Kira stood, staring at the debris-strewn void. Wreckage drifted in slow, eerie silence, pieces of Zephyr hull plating and Yolani ships floating aimlessly. Fires still burned in the atmosphere of Seraphis, the Yolani homeworld. They had won, but at what cost? She turned to Idris. "Casualty report?" His fingers tapped rapidly on the console, pulling up the grim statistics. "We lost 7 ships, hundreds dead, thousands injured. The Yolani—" He hesitated. "They were nearly wiped out. Civilian casualties in the millions. Their military is gone. What's left of their government is asking for immediate assistance." Kira exhaled sharply. "Of course they are." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The Yolani, who had spent decades looking down on humans, who had refused them a place in the Galactic Council, now begged for help. Lieutenant Hale spoke up from the comms station. "Incoming message from Fleet Command, Admiral. They want an update." Kira nodded. "Patch them through." The main view screen flickered, and the stern face of Admiral Jameson, Supreme Commander of the United Terran Navy, appeared. His sharp blue eyes took in the scene behind Kira, the smoldering battlefield, the distant planet still in crisis. "Kira," Jameson said, his voice measured, "I see your fight was a success." "Yes, sir," she replied. "The Zethar have been driven out. The Yolani survived barely. They're asking for aid." Jameson was silent for a moment, considering. Then he leaned forward, his face hard. "Are they asking for aid, or are they asking for protection?" Kira understood what he was getting at. The Yolani hadn't just been attacked. They had been conquered. And if humanity walked away now, the Zethir would come back, more prepared, more ruthless. The only way to ensure the Yolani survived was to place them under Earth's protection. It was an opportunity. The same Galactic Council that had rejected humanity would now be forced to acknowledge their power. "They'll want a full military occupation," Kira said carefully. "They won't say it outright, but they know they have no choice." Jameson nodded. "Then make it happen. Deploy ground teams, secure their capital, and inform the Yolani government that they are now under the Terran Defense Initiative." Kira felt a small smirk tug at her lips. The same Yolani who had once called humans barbarians would now live under the protection of those very same barbarians. "Understood, sir." Jameson gave her one last firm nod before the transmission cut out. Hours later, the first Terran warships descended into the atmosphere of Seraphis. Dropships roared through the smoke-filled sky, deploying squads of Terran Marines onto the devastated streets. The Yolani people watched from the ruins of their city, their wide, luminous eyes filled with uncertainty. Some looked grateful, others resentful. Kira landed with the first wave of ground forces, stepping out of the dropship in full military uniform. Yolani officials hurried forward, their leader, a thin, gray-skinned male named Prime Minister Veyron, bowing his head slightly. "Admiral Volkov," he said, his voice strained, "your arrival is appreciated." Kira didn't bother with formalities. "The Dominion will return. You know that. If you want your species to survive, you'll need us here." Veyron hesitated, his hands clasping and unclasping nervously. "We understand, and we will do what is necessary to ensure our people's survival." Kira's gaze was cold. "Then say it." Silence stretched between them. Around them, Yolani citizens whispered amongst themselves, watching as human soldiers secured the streets. They had called for help, and help had come. But now the consequences were clear. Veyron swallowed hard, then spoke the words that changed everything. "The Yolani Republic formally requests to come under the protection of the United Terran Navy." Kira nodded, sealing the fate of an entire species. "Then welcome to the Terran Defense Initiative." The era of human dominance in the galaxy had begun. The Yolani homeworld, Seraphis, was officially under Terran protection. The banners of the United Terran Navy flew alongside Yolani sigils, a silent declaration of what had happened. Humanity had answered their distress call. Now, humanity would decide their future. Admiral Kira Volkov stood at the edge of the Yolani capital, watching as Terran soldiers moved through the streets. They weren't conquerors, but they weren't just saviors either. They were occupiers, no matter how politely it was framed. The Yolani, once a proud and independent species, were now under the watchful eye of a species they had dismissed as savages. Kira turned as Commander Idris approached. We've begun setting up defensive perimeters around key infrastructure, he reported. Local resistance is minimal. Most of them are too shell-shocked to fight back. She nodded. And the ones who aren't? Idris hesitated. There's tension, Admiral. Some of the Yolani don't want us here. There have been incidents. Graffiti on our vehicles. Reports of Yolani refusing to cooperate. No direct violence yet, but it's a matter of time. Kira wasn't surprised. It was one thing to beg for help when you were desperate. It was another to live with the price of that help. Keep the soldiers on alert, she said. We're here to protect them, not to rule them. But if they push us, they'll learn why humans survived on a death world. Idris gave a tight nod and walked off, leaving Kira to her thoughts. Just then, Lieutenant Hale's voice crackled through her comm. Admiral, we've got something on long-range sensors. You'll want to see this. Back aboard the Vindicator, Kira strode onto the bridge, eyes locked onto the holographic display. The sensor feed showed a massive energy signature approaching the system, larger than anything they'd seen before. Tell me that's not what I think it is, Kira muttered. Hale's expression was grim. It's a Zephyr armada. The room tensed. The Zephyr hadn't just retreated to lick their wounds. They had gone to regroup, to bring reinforcements. Now they were coming back, with a fleet nearly triple the size of the one humanity had just defeated. How long until they reach Seraphis? Kira asked. Idris checked the data. 17 hours, maybe 18 if we're lucky. 18 hours. That was all the time they had before annihilation came knocking. Kira clenched her jaw. Send an emergency message to Fleet Command. We need reinforcements now. Hale's fingers flew over the console, transmitting the distress call. But Kira already knew the truth. Terran reinforcements were days away. The first expeditionary fleet was the only force in this sector, which meant that for the next 18 hours, they were on their own. The bridge was silent, everyone waiting for her orders. Finally, Kira spoke. Prepare for battle. If the Zephyr thought humanity would break, they had another thing coming. This wasn't over. This had just begun. The countdown had begun. 18 hours. That was all the time humanity had to prepare before the Zephyr armada arrived to wipe them out. Kira Volkov stood on the bridge of the Vindicator, her mind working through the impossible situation. They were outnumbered, outgunned. The Yolani were in no condition to fight. Their fleet shattered, their defenses burned to ash. The nearest Terran reinforcements were days away. And yet, surrender was not an option. We make our stand here, Kira said, her voice like steel. If the Zephyr want this planet, they'll have to take it over our dead bodies. She turned to her officers. Idris, give me a full tactical breakdown. What do we have left? Idris pulled up a holographic display of their fleet. We have 23 warships still operational. Damage across the board, but functional. The planetary defenses are in ruins, but we've started deploying surface-to-orbit missile platforms with Yolani assistance. It won't be enough to stop an armada, but it'll slow them down. Kira nodded. And ground forces? 4,000 Marines deployed across key locations. Another 2,000 Yolani volunteers, but they're barely trained. Idris hesitated. Truth be told, Admiral, it's not enough. It never was. Kira turned to Hale. Any word from Fleet Command? Hale shook his head. They received our distress call. The Second Fleet is mobilizing, but even at emergency speeds, they won't reach us for at least 72 hours. 72 hours. They only had 18. Kira clenched her fists. No help was coming. This fight would be won or lost here. She exhaled sharply. Then we'll make them regret coming back. I want every ship in the fleet repositioned into a defensive formation around Seraphis. We can't win an open battle, but we can make them bleed for every inch they take. Idris nodded grimly. A death trap. Exactly, Kira said. We use the planet's gravity well to our advantage. Force them into choke points. We strike hard, fast, then fall back. Hit and run until we grind them down. Hale hesitated. And if that's not enough? Kira's expression darkened. Then we make sure the Zethir pay so much for this world that they never come back. The preparations moved fast. Across the Yolani capital, Terran Marines worked side by side with desperate Yolani civilians, reinforcing defensive positions, setting up makeshift barricades, and preparing for the inevitable slaughter. Kira walked through the city streets, her boots crunching against shattered glass. The devastation from the first Zethir attack was everywhere. Collapsed buildings, smoldering ruins, bodies buried under rubble. She spotted a group of Yolani standing near an old government complex. One of them, a young male barely out of adolescence, clutched a plasma rifle in shaking hands. You ever used that before? Kira asked. The Yolani boy stiffened. No, but I will if I have to. She studied him. There was fear in his wide, luminous eyes, but beneath that, anger, hatred. The Zethir had taken everything from him. Good, Kira said, because tomorrow we send those bastards back to hell. The Yolani boy nodded. The humans and the Yolani weren't friends, but now they were something else, allies in survival. As the final hours ticked away, Kira stood aboard the Vindicator, watching the stars. The Zethir armada would be here soon. Thousands of ships, millions of warriors. She tapped her comms. All hands, prepare for combat. This is it. Her officers acknowledged her. Across the fleet, weapons primed, missile bays locked, engines burned hot. The void of space trembled as the Zethir arrived. A massive, dark armada emerged from warp, stretching across the horizon like an unstoppable tide. Dreadnoughts, battleships, swarms of fighter craft. The Dominion had returned, and this time they weren't here to conquer. They were here to exterminate. The lead warship broadcasted a message across all channels. A familiar voice echoed through the Vindicator's bridge. You should have left when you had the chance, humans, the Zethir warlord sneered. Now, you will die alongside the weaklings you tried to protect. Kira smirked, eyes gleaming with defiance. Then come and kill us, she said. The battle for Seraphis had begun. The void of space erupted into chaos. The Zethir armada descended upon Seraphis like a wave of death, their ships blotting out the stars as they unleashed a storm of plasma and kinetic fire. The United Terran Navy, battered but unbroken, answered with everything they had. From the bridge of the Vindicator, Admiral Kira Volkov stood like a statue, watching the battle unfold. 23 human warships stood against an enemy force more than triple their size. But numbers had never won wars. Strategy did. Hold the line, she barked. Stick to the gravity well maneuver. We make them bleed for every step forward. The fleet moved, executing Kira's battle plan with terrifying precision. They didn't fight the Zethir head-on. That would have been suicide. Instead, they lured them in, using Seraphis's gravity well to force them into tight formations, into bottlenecks where human ships could focus fire. The first wave of Zethir ships fell fast. Railgun slugs the size of small cars tore through their hulls. Plasma lances cut through their armor like molten knives. Explosions rippled across the enemy formation as human warships fought like demons. Aboard the Vindicator, Idris called out enemy movements. Multiple dreadnoughts pushing the left flank. They're trying to break through. Kira's mind raced. If the Zethir broke past the fleet, they'd reach Seraphis, and the ground forces wouldn't stand a chance. Bring the Hammerfall and Resolute around to intercept, she ordered. Pin them down with overlapping fields of fire. 2 Terran battleships adjusted course. their engines roaring as they cut off the Zephyr advance. Within seconds, they were trading fire, blinding explosions flaring between them. The Zephyr were learning. They had expected a slaughter, but what they found was resistance like nothing they had ever seen. One of the enemy dreadnoughts tried to break past the trap, and paid for it. The Hammerfall unleashed its full broadside. A barrage of kinetic rounds impacted the Zephyr warship, tearing through its hull with horrifying force. The enemy vessel's shields collapsed, and a final torpedo barrage from the Resolute split it in half. The Zephyr ship exploded, debris scattering in all directions. The bridge cheered, but Kira wasn't celebrating yet, because the real battle was about to begin. The second wave came harder. The Zephyr adjusted their tactics, pushing in multiple directions at once. They sent suicide squadrons, dozens of smaller ships crashing into Terran formations, forcing them to reposition. The humans were winning, but the Zephyr had the numbers. And slowly, inch by inch, the enemy pushed forward. Kira clenched her fists. They weren't going to hold forever. Her comm buzzed. "Admiral," Idris said, voice tight. "Enemy ground forces incoming." Her blood turned to ice. On Seraphis, the sky burned as Zephyr dropships rained from orbit like falling stars. On the ground, Terran Marines and Yolani resistance fighters braced for the incoming assault. The makeshift barricades, the fortifications, they all felt small now, against the sheer unstoppable force of the Zephyr war machine. Sergeant Daniel Briggs, leading one of the forward defenses, watched as the first wave of Zephyr warriors hit the ground running. "Here they come!" someone shouted. The Zephyr weren't just an advanced species. They were monsters, 8 feet tall, armor-plated with razor-sharp mandibles and organic weaponry fused to their bodies. They didn't just fight. They devoured. "Hold the line!" Briggs roared. The Zephyr charged. Human rifles opened up, unleashing hell. Railgun rounds and plasma bursts ripped into the alien ranks, tearing through their chitinous exoskeletons. The first wave fell, but more kept coming. A Zephyr warrior leapt over the barricade, landing right on top of Briggs. The sergeant barely had time to react before the monster's clawed hand lashed out, slicing through his armor. He grunted in pain but didn't fall. Instead, he shoved his pistol under the Zephyr's jaw and pulled the trigger. The alien's head exploded, and Briggs kicked the corpse off him. "Push them back!" he roared. The battle for the ground had begun. Back aboard the Vindicator, Kira watched the Zephyr landings with cold fury. "We need to hold them off until reinforcements arrive," Idris said. Kira narrowed her eyes. "Then we change the rules of the battle." Hale looked up. "Admiral," Kira's voice was calm, deadly. "We take the fight to their flagship." Silence. Idris blinked. "You want to go after the Zephyr warlord directly?" "We don't win this by outlasting them," Kira said. "We cut off the head. No warlord, no battle plan. Their forces will collapse." Hale swallowed. "That's a suicide mission." Kira smirked. "Not if we do it right." She turned to her crew. "Prepare a strike team. We're boarding that flagship." The humans had one last card to play, and they were about to go all in. The plan was madness. Kira knew that. The entire bridge crew knew that. But if they didn't do something bold, something reckless, they would all be dead in a matter of hours. The Zephyr outnumbered them. They were pushing through. The ground forces were barely holding the city. And if the battle kept going the way it was, Seraphis would fall before reinforcements arrived. So Kira did the only thing that made sense. She decided to kill the Zephyr warlord herself. "Idris," she ordered, "get me a strike team. Our best fighters. We're boarding that flagship." Her second-in-command hesitated only for a second before giving a sharp nod. "Understood, Admiral." Hale turned in his seat, eyes wide. "Ma'am, You cannot be serious. I've never been more serious, Kira cut in. That warlord is the brain of their invasion. If we kill him, the Zephyr forces will fracture. We've seen it happen before. They don't function well without centralized leadership. If we remove him, we buy ourselves the time we need. Hale clenched his jaw, but he knew better than to argue. Understood, he said. Within minutes, a strike team of elite Terran Marines assembled in the Vindicator's hangar. They were the best of the best, veterans who had fought and survived humanity's worst wars. They wore enhanced combat armor, their weapons primed for close-quarters annihilation. Kira walked into the hangar, fully geared up. A modified railgun rifle was strapped to her back, a plasma sidearm at her hip. She wasn't about to send soldiers into hell without leading them herself. Sergeant Briggs, bloody but alive from the ground battle, saluted her. "Didn't think you'd be crazy enough to come down here, Admiral," he said. Kira smirked. "If I wasn't crazy, I wouldn't be human." Briggs chuckled. "Fair enough." The dropship was ready. The plan was simple. Punch a hole through the battle, land on the enemy flagship, and take out the warlord. The only problem? That flagship was surrounded by 1,000 enemy ships. The Vindicator led the suicide run. The entire Terran fleet shifted its focus, blasting a temporary gap in the Zephyr formation. The dropship launched, streaking through the chaos, weaving through explosions and laser fire. Inside, the Marines gripped their weapons, ready for the worst fight of their lives. 10 seconds to breach, the pilot called. The enemy flagship loomed ahead, a massive black fortress, covered in spiked armor glowing red from the energy coursing through it. The home of the warlord. The dropship dodged incoming fire, then slammed into the hull of the enemy vessel. Impact. The doors burst open, and the Marines stormed out, weapons blazing. The Zephyr guards reacted immediately, their monstrous forms rushing to intercept. Close-quarters combat, the most brutal kind. The corridor erupted into pure carnage. Kira fired her railgun, blasting a hole clean through a Zephyr's chest. Blood sprayed against the walls, but she was already moving forward, dodging a clawed strike from another warrior. Briggs unloaded his shotgun into a Zephyr's face at point-blank range, splattering the walls with alien gore. The fight was savage, merciless, but the Marines kept pushing. They had one goal: find the warlord, kill him, end the invasion. They stormed through the flagship, gunning down anything that moved. The deeper they went, the more resistance they faced. Finally, they reached a set of massive doors, reinforced with Zephyr biotechnology. "This is it," Kira said. She pulled a thermal charge from her belt, slapped it onto the door, and detonated it. Boom! The doors blew inward, revealing a vast, throne-like chamber. And there, standing at the center of the room, was the Zephyr warlord. He was a monster, even larger than the others, his exoskeleton plated with golden armor, his 4 burning eyes locked onto the humans with pure hatred. "You dare step into my domain!" His voice rumbled through the chamber. Kira raised her rifle. "Damn right we do." The final battle had begun. The Zephyr warlord stood at the far end of the throne chamber, his golden-plated exoskeleton gleaming under the eerie red lights. The chamber itself pulsed like a living organism, the walls lined with Zephyr biotechnology, dark, chitinous structures that oozed with energy. His 4 burning eyes locked onto Kira and her strike team. "You should have fled, Deathworlders," he hissed, his voice like grinding stone. "You are nothing, insects playing at war." Kira smirked, raising her rifle. "Funny, we just tore through your ship like it was made of paper. And now, we're here to kill you." The warlord laughed, a deep clicking sound that echoed through the chamber. Around him, dozens of Zephyr warriors emerged from the walls, their organic weapons glowing with energy. "You will try," the warlord said. Then he roared, a sound so powerful it shook the walls. And the fight began. The chamber erupted into chaos. The Zephyr warriors charged, their massive clawed limbs striking out at the Marines. The first two humans went down instantly, their bodies ripped apart before they could even scream. Kira rolled aside, raising her railgun. She fired, the massive slug punching through a Zethyr's skull, sending it collapsing to the floor. Briggs fought like a demon, unloading his shotgun into a Zethyr's chest, then drawing his combat knife and ramming it into another's throat. The Marines fought hard, but the Zephyr were relentless. "We can't hold," someone yelled. Kira gritted her teeth. They didn't have time for a prolonged fight. The longer this took, the more Marines they would lose. The warlord stood at the back, watching, waiting for them to weaken before he stepped in. Kira made a split-second decision. "Briggs, cover me!" She broke into a sprint, weaving through the chaos, dodging slicing claws and whipping energy blades. Her armor screeched as an enemy strike grazed her shoulder, but she kept moving. The warlord saw her coming, and he moved to meet her. They clashed in the center of the chamber. The warlord swung a massive blade, its organic metal edge glowing with superheated plasma. Kira ducked just in time, feeling the heat sear past her head. She fired point blank, but the warlord's armor absorbed the hit. He backhanded her, the force sending her flying into a pillar. Pain exploded through her body, but she wasn't done. The warlord stalked forward, towering over her. "You think you can kill me, human?" he sneered. Kira coughed up blood and grinned through bloody teeth. "Yeah," she said, "because we Deathworlders don't go down easy." She pulled the pin on a plasma grenade and jammed it straight into his chest armor. The warlord's eyes widened in shock. Boom! The explosion ripped through him, sending chunks of exoskeleton and burning flesh flying in all directions. For a second, there was only silence. Then the remaining Zephyr warriors screeched in panic. Their leader was dead. And the one thing humanity had learned about the Zephyr was that without leadership, they fell apart. The Zephyr forces broke. And the Marines? They finished the job. Back aboard the Vindicator, the Zephyr fleet began to collapse. Their flagship, now leaderless, drifted aimlessly. Across the battlefield, the once organized Dominion forces crumbled, their coordinated attacks turning into panic. The Terran fleet pushed forward, tearing through the remaining Zephyr ships like a pack of wolves, ripping apart a wounded beast. Minutes later, the remaining Zephyr forces fled, abandoning the battle. Humanity had won. The war for Seraphis was over. Hours later, Kira stood in the ruins of the Yalani capital. Around her, Terran Marines walked among the survivors, offering medical aid. The Yalani, once too proud to accept humanity as equals, now looked at them with something new. Reverence, respect. Prime Minister Veyrin approached, his expression unreadable. "You saved us," he said. Kira nodded. "Yeah, we did." Veyrin hesitated. Then, for the first time, he bowed his head. "The Yalani Republic will never forget what your people have done for us," he said. "And from this day forward, we will stand with humanity." A new alliance had been born, and as Kira looked up at the burned sky, she knew one thing for certain. The galaxy had just learned a very important lesson. Never underestimate a Deathworlder.